They tried everything. Machines money, the best doctors in New York City. But the woman who built an empire was slipping away. Eleanor Hayes, the youngest and most powerful CEO in the country, collapsed in front of hundreds while her empire froze in panic. Her immune system was devouring itself and nothing could stop it. Until a widowed veteran, a man no one knew, no one expected, walked in with a quiet gift that rewrote destiny. One drop of blood. One act of defiance. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has gone. The storm didn't ask permission. It came down hard over Manhattan, rain hammering glass towers like bullets on steel. Lightning cracked across the skyline, flashing for half a second the looming figure of Hayes Tower, a monolith of glass and chrome 36 floors tall. Inside, the air smelled of perfume and polished oak, a ballroom turned boardroom, packed with suits and sharpened glances. The annual shareholders' meeting of Hayes Biotech was underway. Numbers glowing across 20-foot screens, billions in profits dancing through the air. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Hayes, slate gray suit, sharp black heels, hair pulled tight into a crown of discipline. She didn't speak so much as slice through the air, her voice measured, confident and merciless. Innovation. She told the crowd, isn't about luck, it's about domination. Her words carried the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The room leaned in. Investors who owned entire wings of Fortune 500 companies sat forward, hanging on her every phrase. And then silence. Not the silence she commanded at will, not the deliberate pause that made men sweat in their $1,000 ties. No, this was something else. Eleanor's lips trembled. Her hand jerked once, twice, as if her body were rejecting its own authority. She clutched the edge of the podium. For the first time in her career, her poise broke. A gasp rippled through the hall as she crumpled mid-sentence, slamming to the polished floor, her microphone screeching in protest. Chaos. Suits scattered, chairs clattered, assistants screamed into phones. The COO, Marcus Reed, her former fiancé, leapt to his feet, barking at security like a general in retreat. Get paramedics now, clear the floor. His face remained composed, but his eyes betrayed panic. Within minutes, Eleanor was rushed through the service exit, her limp frame swallowed by the blur of flashing red lights. Rain drenched the stretchers as sirens carried her across the city. St. Luke's Medical Center. The ER was a fluorescent battlefield. Machines whined, nurses barked vitals, doctors traded clipped sentences like gunfire. Eleanor's body spasmed against the restraints, her veins flooding with drugs that refused to work. It wasn't a stroke, wasn't a heart attack. Her immune system was attacking itself, her nerves convulsing like wires in a storm. Every known treatment failed. Every protocol shattered. An hour passed, then another. The words no billionaire, no boardroom, no empire could command whispered into the sterile air. We need a miracle. 2 floors below, a man in a military jacket sat alone in the blood donation unit. Daniel Cross, 41, former Army field surgeon, the kind who had worked under mortar fire and stitched soldiers back together with seconds to spare. Now he was just a quiet man in Brooklyn, a widower, a father raising his daughter above a flower shop. Donating blood was the only ritual he'd never stopped since his wife's funeral. The nurse slid a needle into his arm. Crimson flowed into the bag. She checked the scanner, paused. The machine blinked strangely, throwing markers she'd never seen before. That's unusual, she murmured. A phone call was made upstairs. Within half an hour, a young doctor rushed into the room. Sir, we have a critical patient upstairs. Would you consent to compatibility testing? Immediately, Daniel's answer was simple. Hook me up. They wheeled his blood upstairs like contraband. Minutes later, Eleanor's vitals shifted. Her oxygen stabilized. Her tremors slowed. The line of flat despair on the monitor ticked upward. Doctors exchanged glances, relief, disbelief, even fear. In the sterile quiet, it was clear his blood was doing what billions could not. 2 days later, in a private suite lined with white curtains, Eleanor's eyes flickered open. She remembered lights, pain in her spine, falling into nothing. Now there was only the hum of machines. Marcus sat beside her, his tie-loosened face pale with exhaustion. You're lucky, Eleanor, he said, his voice a strained whisper. Your heart nearly stopped. We called in every specialist. Nothing worked. Then they gave you blood from a donor. Her throat rasped. Who? Dr. Daniel Cross. Former Army surgeon. Works at a Brooklyn clinic. Walked in off the street. A nobody. Her eyes narrowed, fighting to focus. How much did we pay him? Marcus hesitated. We offered $10 million, and he refused. Eleanor pushed herself up through her arms trembled. Find him, bring him here. But when the hospital called, Daniel declined. He didn't even collect the check. His words relayed by the nurse cut sharper than any scalpel. I'm not interested in being anyone's hero. I did what was needed. That's enough. News spread within hours. A billionaire saved by a stranger who refused $10 million. Every network carried the headline. But the man was a ghost, no social media, no interviews, no trace, but an old Army ID photo. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Hayes was ignored, and it haunted her. Because she wasn't used to being forgotten, she was used to being obeyed. Yet the man who had just saved her life had vanished into the shadows like she was just another patient on a battlefield. And that unsettled her more than death itself. The storm had passed, but Manhattan still glistened under its residue. Streetlights blinked against slick pavement taxi horns cut through the damp air, and somewhere in the upper floors of Hayes Tower, Eleanor Hayes sat propped against a hospital-issue pillow, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her empire carried on without her meetings, deals, whispers of vulnerability, but none of it mattered. Not yet. Because she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had disappeared, Daniel Cross. She whispered his name like a challenge. She had tried calling again. The number had been disconnected. Her lawyers had sent formal requests ignored. A courier had been turned away from a Brooklyn clinic. A man who refused $10 million was either reckless, insane, or carrying a code stronger than money itself. That unsettled her. She had been raised in rooms where everything had a price. If someone couldn't be bought, they were dangerous or indispensable. Marcus Reed stood at the foot of her bed, arms crossed, his expression hovering between professional concern and personal frustration. You're pushing yourself, he said. We should let the board handle the fallout. Investors need reassurance, not a scavenger hunt for some. She cut him off with a sharp look. That man saved my life, and he doesn't want to be found. I don't care. Marcus exhaled through his nose, a gesture she knew meant both surrender and disdain. This isn't about gratitude, is it? You can't stand being ignored. Her jaw tightened. He wasn't wrong, but it was more than ego. Something in her chest whispered, pulling her toward Daniel Cross, like gravity toward a falling star. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of Brooklyn, above a flower shop where petals wilted in the window, Daniel tucked his daughter beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. Lily Cross, 10 years old, bright-eyed and curious, clutched a stuffed owl in one hand and peered up at her father. Dad. She mumbled, eyelids heavy with sleep. Did you help someone today? Daniel paused at the question, his heart tugging. He smoothed a strand of hair from her cheek. Yes. Was it important? Every life is important. She smiled faintly before drifting into dreams, unaware that her father's blood now pulsed inside one of the most powerful women in America. The apartment around them told a story Eleanor couldn't have imagined. The walls were bare of wealth, but not of life. A lopsided bookshelf sagged with medical journals and Lily's fantasy novels. The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and chamomile tea. 2 magnets clung to the fridge, one shaped like a stethoscope, the other a faded photo of Lily at 5, holding a crayon drawing of her late mother. Daniel sat at the small table, papers spread across its surface. He marked patient notes with a steady hand, but his mind wandered back to the sterile hospital, the face of a woman he hadn't meant to save the ripple his blood had caused. He didn't crave headlines. He didn't want her gratitude. He wanted stillness, the kind a man builds after losing everything. The next morning, Eleanor's recovery suite filled with whispers from her medical team. Her test results glowed across the screen, vitals steady, inflammation dropping, neurological tremors nearly gone. Dr. Patel adjusted his glasses, his tone a mixture of awe and confusion. Your condition isn't just stabilizing, it's reversing. Eleanor's brows furrowed. Because of the transfusion, Patel hesitated. There's no other explanation. His blood contains an antigenic pattern we've never recorded. It interacts with your autoimmune system like a reprogramming code. Eleanor leaned forward. So I need more. With caution, frequent extraction could harm him. Ideally, we'd want his cooperation for long-term study. Then get it. The doctor's gaze dropped. He already refused. Multiple times. Eleanor's fingers curled against the blanket. Then he hasn't heard the right offer. That afternoon, she stared at the anonymous donor report in her lap. A single name. A military record redacted in places. Widow, Army surgeon, Brooklyn Clinic. A ghost in plain sight. She traced the lines of the document as if the ink itself might reveal more. Outside her window, the city moved without her. Skyscrapers glinted in the late light, taxis crawled like ants, and ordinary lives carried on. But Eleanor couldn't let this ordinary man slip away. 3 blocks from that view, Daniel Cross walked Lily to school. She skipped beside him, her ponytail bouncing, her backpack too heavy for her small frame. He kissed the top of her head at the gate, his voice low but firm. Be kind. Be brave. And don't let anyone cut in the lunch line. Lily rolled her eyes but smiled. Yes, Dad. He stood there for a moment after she disappeared inside the quiet, settling over him like armor. He didn't know that across the city, Eleanor Hayes was already plotting to find him. Not as a CEO seeking a donor, but as a woman who refused to be forgotten. And neither of them knew their lives were already bound together by more than blood. The city never slowed for anyone, not even for Eleanor Hayes. Just 2 weeks after her collapse, the boardroom was already circling sharks, scenting blood in the water. Her COO, Marcus Reed, chaired meetings in her absence, slipping into her role with a confidence that reeked of rehearsal. He framed it as stability, but Eleanor knew better. Marcus was watching, waiting, daring her to falter. But Eleanor Hayes wasn't built to falter. She sat in her recovery suite, hair down for the first time in years, wrapped in a robe that still smelled faintly of antiseptic. Her laptop balanced on her knees, streaming reports, numbers, news feeds. Yet her eyes lingered not on profit margins, but on a single encrypted file the background reporter team had finally compiled on Daniel Cross. Former Army surgeon, honored for valor, widowed at 34. Wife deceased, medical error, adverse drug interaction. 1 daughter. No social media. No debts. No weaknesses they could exploit. The file ended abruptly, as if the man had stepped off the record into shadow. She closed the laptop, her chest tightening. 10 million hadn't tempted him. Not access, not recognition, not leverage. A man who couldn't be bought was either a liability or a miracle. Eleanor wasn't sure which frightened her more. Marcus entered without knocking. His tie was perfect, his cologne sharp. You're still obsessing over him, he said, gesturing to the closed laptop. Her gaze hardened. He saved my life. He did his job. Doctors save lives every day. Not like that. Marcus leaned against the window frame, his reflection tall and smug against the glass. You're not yourself. I've seen this before. Near-death experiences make people irrational. Don't confuse gratitude with something else. Eleanor straightened. You offered him money, didn't you? Marcus stiffened, then smirked. 10 million. He turned it down. Who does that? Either a fool or a man with something to hide. Or a man who understands value better than you do, she snapped. For a flicker, Marcus's mask slipped, bitterness flashing in his eyes. He had once been the man by her side, the fiancé she'd chosen before the empire eclipsed everything else. Now he was only the shadow of a partnership that never happened, his ambition sharpening into resentment. That night, as the city glittered outside her window, Eleanor whispered to the empty room, "Why did you walk away, Daniel Cross, across Brooklyn?" Daniel sat at his kitchen table, bills spread before him. Lily perched beside him with a pencil between her teeth, working through math problems with exaggerated sighs. You know, Dad, she said without looking up, if you let me get a cat, I'd do homework faster. Daniel smirked over the rim of his coffee. Cats and asthma don't mix. You had asthma when I was 5. I don't anymore. That's like banning pizza because you choked once. It was traumatic pizza. Lily rolled her eyes, her smile betraying her frustration. The banter was ordinary, warm a shield against the world outside. But when Daniel's phone buzzed again, an unknown number, he didn't even reach for it. He knew who it was. He also knew what they wanted. Later that evening, Eleanor's doctors entered her suite with tight expressions. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, we've reviewed the latest scans. The antigenic markers from the transfusion are extraordinary. Your neural inflammation is reversing. Your autoimmune markers are stabilizing. Eleanor's breath caught. You're saying you're improving significantly, and we have reason to believe it's directly tied to Mr. Cross's blood. She steadied her voice. So I need him. The doctor hesitated. We can't force participation, and he's already declined multiple requests. Eleanor's hands curled into fists against the blanket. Then I'll ask him myself. When her assistant reminded her that she wasn't cleared to leave the hospital, Eleanor's reply was icy. Then bring me clothes. The following afternoon, Daniel poured cold coffee into a paper cup in the break room of the clinic where he worked weekends. The door opened quietly, but the air shifted. He turned, and there she was, Eleanor Hayes. No makeup, no heels, no boardroom armor, just dark jeans, a navy coat, and the same storm in her eyes that had once commanded rooms worth billions. Daniel Cross. She said, her voice calm but unyielding. He set the coffee down. Ms. Hayes, you tracked me down to a walk-in clinic, he added dryly. I'm thorough. He raised a brow. What do you want? Eleanor stepped closer, studying him like a puzzle that refused to solve itself. You saved my life. I offered you 10 million. You walked away without a word. I need to understand why. His reply was calm, surgical. Because you thought saving someone's life could be translated into a check. That's not gratitude. That's ownership. The words hit harder than she expected. For a long beat silence stretched between them, the hum of the fluorescent light buzzing like a judge's gavel. Finally, Eleanor said softly, All right, let's say I accept that. What if I asked you to help not as a donor, but as a doctor? My doctor. Your terms, your rules. Daniel's expression didn't shift, but something in his eyes darkened. I haven't practiced long-term in years. I barely hold this job. You led trauma units in Kandahar under fire. You're more qualified than anyone I've met. And yet his voice cracked low. I couldn't save my wife. Her breath caught. For the first time, Eleanor saw him not as a mystery, but as a man carrying a wound too heavy to speak of. She whispered, That doesn't disqualify you, Daniel. That's why you care. He looked away, jaw tight. I don't want to be someone's miracle. People put you on a pedestal just to blame you when you fall. I don't want a miracle, she said. I want a partner in survival. Her words hung between them, heavy as the storm clouds outside. Rainwater still clung to the city like a second skin the night Eleanor left the clinic. She'd gone in with a plan and left with a question that wouldn't stop echoing in her ribs. I don't want a miracle. I want a partner in survival. The words felt like a line thrown across a ravine. On the walk back to the car, her hand kept drifting to her sternum, as if to still the unfamiliar ache there. Back in her suite, the machines hummed their indifferent lullaby, Dr. Parrot. Patel arrived with a tablet and the kind of guarded optimism doctors wear when hope is a liability. Your scans, he said, tapping the screen. Neuroinflammation continues to decline. Autoimmune markers are receding, far beyond anything we modeled. She took the tablet, eyes scanning the graphs, the down-sloping lines, the quiet mercy in numbers. How long does this hold? That depends. He hesitated, then chose honesty. Without further exposure to the novel antigenic pattern in Mr. Cross's blood, the effect will likely attenuate. You're in a window, weeks, maybe days, where the immune recalibration could lock in, or reverse. So I need him. She hated the need in her voice. You need a medically supervised protocol, preferably with his cooperation. Patel glanced at her. And he still hasn't consented. Eleanor handed back the tablet. Outside taillights smeared the dark like red brushstrokes. He will, she said, though certainty didn't come. Or I'll find another way. Respectfully, Patel said softly, another way may not exist. When he left the room, felt too clean, too bright. She dimmed the lights and lay still, palms over the thin hospital blanket. Somewhere inside her, a whisper had become a clock. She pictured the man from the clinic. Steady gaze, careful words, grief folded like a flag and stored behind his ribs. The world had taught Eleanor to read people the way she read quarterly reports, but Daniel Cross was not a model she could run. He was a locked door with a child sleeping on the other side. Across the river, in a kitchen that hummed with the ordinary dishwasher rinse radiator hiss, the quiet clink of forks, Daniel scraped plates into the trash. Lily sat at the table with a pencil tucked behind her ear, writing vocabulary words in blocky letters. "Define resolute," he said, drying a pan. She didn't look up. "Deciding to get me a cat." "Try again." Unshakably determined, she recited, the corner of her mouth rising. He set the pan down and ruffled her ponytail. "There you go." She squinted at him. "You're doing that thing." "What thing?" "The face where you're not here, but you're pretending to be." He leaned a hip against the counter cot. "Just thinking. About the person you helped." "Something like that." She scribbled, then paused. "Are you going to help them again?" He measured his words. "I don't know yet." Lily considered this, then returned to her list as if the universe had just shifted a fraction and she had noted it. On the fridge, the two magnets held an old photo steady. Emily's auburn hair in morning light. Lily, at 5, in a lopsided braid. Daniel younger, unburdened. Grief has a way of setting like concrete in the joints, Daniel thought. You learn to move with it, but you never forget where it poured. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring out. Then another buzz voicemail, full. He powered it down and listened to Lily pronounce indomitable with triumphant syllables. Later, after lights out, he sat at the small dining table and thumbed a worn corner of a letter he hadn't opened in years. Emily's handwriting flowed across the envelope, "To you for someday." He put it down. Not tonight. He wasn't ready to hear the voice of the woman. The hospital couldn't save the voice that might tell him living wasn't betrayal. At 3:07 a.m., Eleanor woke choking on air. Not a seizure panic, pure and bright like lightning behind her sternum. She slipped out of bed and padded barefoot onto the private floor's dim hallway. The city glowed beyond the glass, a constellation of strangers. In the quiet lab suite, she perched on the edge of a stool and stared at her hands. They had signed contracts that made and broke careers. Tonight they shook. Her phone lay face down. She turned it over, scrolled to unsent drafts, opened the half-composed message to Daniel. "You don't know me." "Don't know." "Not really. You saved me anyway. Everyone else did their jobs. You did something else. You drew a line and said no. I have never known how to accept no. Teach me how." She hovered over send, then locked the screen, shame flushing her cheeks. Powerful people shouldn't beg. Women like her had been trained to turn longing into leverage. But something in the clinic, his refusal, his boundary, had called a truer thing to the surface. Not weakness, but the aching desire to be seen beyond the numbers. Morning drew a pale gray line over Brooklyn as Daniel walked Lily to school. The sidewalk steamed from last night's rain. At the corner, a crossing guard held up a stop sign, and Lily squeezed his hand. "You'll be here at 3, she asked. "Ritual is prayer. 3 on the dot. If I'm late, you get the cat." She brightened. "I'll tell Ms. Raymond." He chuckled. "Go. Be brave. Don't let anyone cut in the lunch line." She darted through the gate and turned once hand lifted, then vanished into a river of backpacks. He stood for a moment, watching the doors, the small ache he'd learned to live with settling where it always did. Across the street, a woman in a knit cap closed her flower shop, lifting buckets of long-stem roses inside. The city was waking. A black car idled half a block down, tinted windows revealing nothing. Eleanor sat in the back, sunglasses on, though the sky held no sun yet. She watched the crosswalk, the bend of Daniel's shoulders, the way he looked after his daughter, as if watching were a form of protection. This was a surveillance she wasn't proud of, but the truth was, she needed to see him, not as a headline, but as a person, someone whose life had claims that outranked even hers. Her driver turned slightly. "Ma'am, go," she said. The last thing she wanted was to be the bulldozer in his small morning. Back at Hayes Tower, Patel waited with new labs and a tighter mouth. "We're seeing faint flickers, neurological echoes. It's not decline, not yet, but I'd feel better if we established a schedule." "You want me to ask him again," Eleanor said. "I want you to live." She stared at the city below the labyrinth she'd learned to conquer. She had always prided herself on being the answer for her board, her clients, her employees. Now the answer lived in a walk-up above a florist read bedtime stories about paper dragons and refused $10 million without blinking. Draft the protocol, she said. Ethical guardrails, minimum exposures, full autonomy on his side. Patel blinked. You think that will matter to him? I don't know, she said. But if he won't be bought, he'll have to be believed. Near dusk, Daniel paused at a bodega window, watching Lily inside debating between two flavors of ice cream as if the choice mattered to the fate of nations. His phone sat dark in his pocket, saved from ringing by an empty battery. Outside, a bus wheezed to a stop. Across the street, a kid launched a basketball toward a crooked hoop. Missed, laughed, tried again. He felt the tug in his sternum he didn't have language for. The tug that said a stranger's life was somehow braided with his, now that the act of giving had rewired more than her immune system. He squashed it quick. The last time he followed a feeling, it bled into a loss that remapped his world. They walked home with the ice cream melting over their knuckles. Lily swung their joined hands and tilted up at him. If we ever move, she said. Out of nowhere? Can we be near the ocean? Why the ocean? Because it's loud enough that your thinking face can get drowned out. She bumped his hip, smiling. Then you'll have to talk instead. He laughed, surprised by the softness that rose in his throat. We'll see what we can do. Night found Eleanor on the rooftop garden where boxwood hedges outlined a private path above the city's noise. She let her fingers brush the wet leaves. From here, the skyline looked like a promise and a threat. She remembered the clinic's fluorescent buzz, the way Daniel had said ownership with a surgeon's scorn, and felt heat rise in her face, not from offense, but from recognition. She had tried to control the uncontrollable death-love Mercy with money and contracts. He had said no. Perhaps no was the doorway she had never walked through. Her phone lit with one new message. Not from him. From Marcus. The board wants a timetable. If your miracle donor won't play ball, we pivot. CRISPR trial is ready. Green light. She typed, "Not yet," and hit send. Then she opened the draft to Daniel, again watched the blinking cursor wait like a held breath. And this time, she deleted the whole thing. He didn't need her pleas. He needed proof she could put down the crown. She picked up the phone, called Patel. I want an agreement drafted by morning, medical autonomy on his side. My data fully transparent to him. Press blackout. And add this clause, no contact with his minor child from anyone on our side. Put it in bold. And if he still refuses, Patel asked. Eleanor looked out at the city, the maze she knew, and the man she didn't. Then at least he'll know who I am without the armor. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Daniel set his empty mug in the sink and turned off the kitchen light. The apartment exhaled into quiet. He paused outside Lily's door and listened to the soft rise and fall of her breathing. The sound steadied him more than any oath. He moved to the dining table and lifted the letter again. To you for someday. The someday he had postponed for years hummed in his palm. Outside, a siren wailed and receded. He slid a thumb under the envelope flap, then stopped. He wasn't ready for the past to speak. Not yet. But he was ready maybe to hear what the future was asking. He plugged in his phone and watched the screen flicker to life. Missed calls stacked like dominoes. One number repeated, patient relentless. He didn't press play. He didn't have to. He knew whose voice waited there. When the phone finally settled, a text arrived, unknown number, clean and spare. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. No press. My office. I'll bring the contract. You bring your terms. Daniel stared at the words, feeling the quiet resolve gather in him like tide. Lily turned over in her room. The quilt rustled. He typed 3 letters. I'll come. Eleanor, alone beneath the rooftop string lights, felt her chest loosen for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow wasn't a miracle. It was a door. And she intended to walk through it with her hands open. The conference room on the 62nd floor of Hayes Tower had been designed to intimidate. Its walls were glass, looking out over the sprawl of Manhattan like a throne above the world. Yet when Daniel stepped inside at exactly 10 Hazuras a.m., his boots left faint scuffs on the polished floor, and suddenly the place felt less like a fortress and more like a stage where 2 lives were about to collide. Eleanor sat at the far end of the long table, no bodyguards, no entourage, just a single legal pad and a carafe of untouched water. Her tailored suit was immaculate, but there was no mistaking the pallor under her makeup or the tremor in her hands when she lifted the pen. "You came," she said, her voice measured. Daniel didn't sit yet. "You asked." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the muffled hum of city traffic far below. Then Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her. "I've had an agreement drafted, not an offer, not in the financial sense. A framework. Dr. Patel believes further exposure to your blood could stabilize what's happening in my system. But this only works if it's voluntary, if it's on your terms." He sat slowly leaning forward, elbows on the table. "And if I say no, then I look for other answers." She paused, her eyes catching his. "And I probably don't live long enough to find them." The bluntness landed harder than any legal jargon. Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You want me to keep bleeding for you? That's what this is." "No," she said quickly, then softened. "I want us to try something controlled. Safe. The protocol is designed to minimize risk. Your health matters as much as mine. You're not a donor to me, you're the only reason I'm still breathing." He looked at her evenly. "You think that makes this easier?" Eleanor set the pen down. "No. I think it makes it honest." Patel entered quietly, laying out a folder in front of Daniel. "This is the protocol draft. Frequency monitoring rights reserved to you. You can walk away at any point. No press, no board interference." Daniel flipped through the pages. His soldier's eye scanned the details, the timelines, the disclaimers, the emergency contingencies. He caught Patel's gaze, "And the risk to me minimal, but not zero." Patel admitted, "There are always unknowns when immune systems cross paths. You might experience fatigue, mild anemia. We'll monitor carefully." Daniel closed the folder, drumming his fingers once on the cover. "My daughter can't lose another parent." Eleanor swallowed. "Which is why we included a clause barring any contact with her from anyone in my world. She remains untouchable. She's yours." That answer disarmed him more than any legal protection. He studied her face, the lines of exhaustion, the steel still holding her posture upright. This wasn't a CEO bargaining with capital. This was a woman bargaining with mortality. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "You could fund 1,000 labs, hire every Nobel laureate. Why pin your survival on one stubborn stranger?" Eleanor's eyes flickered. "Because science didn't save me that night. You did. And maybe the cure isn't just biological. Maybe it's human. Maybe it's you." The words unsettled him more than they should have. He shifted back, crossing his arms. "Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm just a man trying to keep his kid fed. And I'm just a woman trying not to die." The starkness of it silenced the room. Finally, Daniel pushed the folder back across the table. "I'll agree. On 2 conditions." Her breath caught. "Name them. First, absolute transparency. I see every scan, every test. No secrets." "Done. Second, if this stops working, you don't drag me deeper. You let me walk away." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Agreed." The deal should have felt transactional. Instead, when their eyes met, something unspoken tightened between them, a recognition that what was being exchanged wasn't just blood, but trust. Patel cleared his throat. "We can begin tomorrow morning. I'll arrange the suite sterile equipment." "No hospitals," Daniel interrupted. "Not the big kind. Too much noise, too many eyes." Eleanor tilted her head. "Then where?" "My call," he said simply. "You'll come to me." That twist startled her. For the first time in her career, she wasn't dictating terms. She was following them. "Very well," she said, a flicker of something respect crossing her face. As he rose to leave, she asked, almost hesitantly, "Does your daughter know?" Daniel paused at the door. "She knows I'm deciding whether to help someone again. That's enough for now." When the door shut, Eleanor sat back in her chair and pressed her palm flat against her chest. For the first time in months, her heart didn't feel like it was dragging her under. It felt tethered. That night, Daniel cleared a corner of his apartment, scrubbing down the small kitchen table until it gleamed. He called an old medic friend, borrowed sterile supplies, made a plan. Lily watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Is this for her? She asked. Daniel met her eyes. Yeah. You don't even like her. I don't even know her. He sighed, sitting on the edge of the couch. But she needs help, and sometimes that's enough. Lily studied him, then sat beside him, her small hand slipping into his. I just don't want you to get sick, Dad. He squeezed back. I'll be careful. Promise. The promise hung in the room, fragile but real. Across the city, Eleanor stood on her balcony, hair loose in the night air. She whispered into the wind as though confessing to no one. Don't let me ruin this. Don't let me push him away. Tomorrow would begin the experiment. But tonight, in two separate apartments, both of them wondered if survival was about more than just the body, if it was about learning to trust the stranger holding the other end of your lifeline. The next morning, rain traced silver streaks across Daniel's kitchen window. He'd rearranged the space so meticulously it almost looked military counters. Scrubbed surfaces, sterilized supplies lined up in precise order. The small kitchen table, once a battlefield of Lily's cereal bowls and school projects, was now draped in sterile white sheets. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find Eleanor standing in the hallway, no bodyguards, no aides, just her in a charcoal coat and low boots, hair pulled back tight against the damp. She looked less like a billionaire and more like a woman trying not to collapse under the weight of her own body. Welcome to Brooklyn, Daniel said dryly, stepping aside. Her gaze swept the apartment as she entered. The walls were lined with Lily's drawings, faded photos, and a shelf of military medals Daniel never displayed in public. Eleanor stopped at one photo, a younger Daniel in fatigue's arm around a woman whose laugh seemed to pour out of the frame. Your wife? She asked softly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Yeah, Claire. She's been gone a while. I'm sorry. He gave a curt nod, pulling the sterile gloves from their wrapper. Sit. She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair at the makeshift clinic table. He tied a tourniquet around her arm with a gentleness that surprised her. His hands were steady, sure, even as the storm outside rattled the window. You do this often? She asked, forcing lightness into her tone. Enough to know it's not the needle that scares people, Daniel replied, sliding the catheter in with practiced precision. It's what comes after. Their eyes met briefly. Eleanor exhaled. What comes after for you? He looked away. Usually another battle. For the next 30 minutes, silence filled the kitchen except for the drip of rain and the soft hiss of Daniel's equipment. He monitored her vitals, adjusted the lines, watched her color shift with every passing moment. When he finally disconnected the line, Eleanor leaned back dizzy, but steadier than she had felt in weeks. You're good at this, she said, voice hushed. Daniel peeled off his gloves, tossed them into the biohazard bag. It's muscle memory, not just that, Eleanor pressed. You care. I can feel it, even if you don't want me to. Before he could reply, Lily's bedroom door creaked open. The teenager padded out in socks, blinking at the sight of her kitchen transformed into a clinic. She froze when her eyes landed on Eleanor. That's Eleanor Hayes, she whispered. Eleanor stiffened, suddenly stripped of her armor. She opened her mouth, but Lily spoke first. Dad, why is she here? Daniel sighed. Lily. This is Ms. Hayes. She's sick. I'm helping her. Lily crossed her arms, eyes sharp. Sick or dangerous? Both, Eleanor admitted quietly. The honesty startled Lily, but it also pulled a flicker of respect from her eyes. Daniel gestured toward the kitchen counter. Go grab breakfast, kiddo. We'll talk later. Lily hesitated, then grabbed a granola bar and retreated, shooting one last wary glance at Eleanor. When she was gone, Eleanor murmured, She's protective. She's all I've got, Daniel said simply. The vulnerability in his tone silenced her. For the first time, Eleanor felt the scale of what he was risking, not just his health, but his daughter's stability. By late afternoon, Eleanor was strong enough to leave. She stood at the door coat over her arm and said, You could have demanded anything in exchange for this. Why didn't you? Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Because then it wouldn't mean anything. I do this or I don't. That's it. Her lips curved the faintest ghost of a smile. Then I hope you keep doing it. When the door shut behind her, Daniel let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The next week blurred into a routine, Eleanor arriving quietly at his apartment. Every few days, Daniel setting up the equipment with mechanical efficiency, Lily watching from a cautious distance. Each time, Eleanor left a little stronger, her steps less shaky, her color brighter. But strength had a price. By the third week, whispers began to circle. The press speculated on her absence. The board grew restless. Marcus Reed started holding temporary leadership briefings. Daniel caught Eleanor one evening, staring out his window at the streetlights with clenched fists. "They want me gone," she muttered. "Who?" "My board." "Marcus. Everyone who benefits from my weakness." "Then don't let them see it," Daniel said. She turned to him. "That's easy for you to say. You don't live under a microscope." "Maybe not, but I've lived under fire." "Same principle, don't give the enemy what they want." Her laugh was quiet, brittle. "You make it sound so simple." "It usually is," Daniel said. "People just complicate it." Something shifted between them in that moment. Something more than patient and doctor, more than billionaire and veteran. She wasn't just fighting for her company anymore. She was learning how to fight for herself, and Daniel was right there in the trench beside her. That night after Eleanor left, Lily sat at the table with her math homework spread wide. "Dad?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah." "She's not what I expected." Daniel raised a brow. "What'd you expect, a shark in heels? She's different here." Daniel watched his daughter, realizing she saw things he didn't want to admit. "Don't get attached, Lily." "Too late," she said softly. And as Daniel sat there in the quiet, he knew Lily wasn't the only one. By the second week, Eleanor could feel her body remembering itself. The tremor that used to rattle her fork at breakfast settled into a whisper. The burning wire that seemed to run along her spine cooled by degrees. She didn't broadcast it. She didn't tell the board. She wore loose sleeves, nodded through video calls, and let Marcus stew in the polite vacuum she left him. But at night, when the city dimmed to a charcoal hum, a different storm moved through her memories. She hadn't authorized a collapsing stage mouths that screamed without sound, her father's voice telling her rest was for the weak. The body was healing, the mind was not. She did what she'd always done with fear, she researched it. On a secure tablet, Eleanor kept locked in a drawer under biometric scan, a folder held files she had no right to have and every reason to need. Daniel Cross's name sat on top of military commendations like a stamp in a passport. She scrolled eyes, drinking in the citations Field Innovation Under Fire, a triage protocol later adopted by NATO medics, a distinguished service cross she doubted he'd ever bragged about. The words extreme valor were not paired with a photo op. They were paired with dates, coordinates, casualties. War has a way of boiling a person down to verbs. Farther down, the tone changed. A hospital logo, a string of emails, a case note, adverse drug interaction, a warning logged by Dr. Cross unheeded, a chart from a night Eleanor could imagine by the shape of the lines, levels dipping, alarms, redlining signatures scrawled as if more ink could slow time. And then a death certificate, Claire Cross, with a cause that read like a technical apology. In the margin of a scanned form, concern noted, proceeding per established protocol, the bureaucracy of tragedy. Eleanor closed the file and set the tablet down like it might burn through the desk. It wasn't only grief that hummed in those documents, it was exile. They hadn't just lost a wife and a mother, they had lost a doctor because he dared to be right. When sleep finally came, it was in slices. In one, the ballroom floor was an ocean she couldn't cross. In another, her office windows swelled like lungs and then shattered raining glass over a city that didn't look up. She woke at 2:58 a.m. with her heart sending marching orders to her hands. The room was too tidy, the silence too loud. She shoved on a sweater and padded down the private hall that connected her penthouse to the clinical suite. A single lamp glowed in the corner like a lighthouse through fog. Daniel was there, one leg crossed over the other, phone in his hand, angled at that precise fatherly tilt. On the screen, Lily lay under a floral comforter, hair a mess, eyes heavy with the kind of trust you don't earn in a week. A book balanced on Daniel's knee. His voice, low measured, spooled into the room, and the paper dragon flew higher and higher until it realized it wasn't the fire that made it dangerous. It was its heart that made it rare. Lily's smile tilted. Night, Dad. Night bug. Dream something good. The screen went dark. Daniel thumbed the phone off and let the quiet settle. He didn't startle when he realized she was there. He just turned his head and acknowledged her with a small nod like they were two soldiers who'd met in the mess tent at the wrong hour. "You're awake," he said. "So are you." He set the book down on the desk. Insomnia's a lousy hobby. Eleanor crossed to a chair and sat, drawing her knees a fraction closer to her chest, an unguarded gesture she'd never perform in daylight. "I haven't heard that story since I was 10. He looked at the book. Claire used to read it. Lily still asks for it when her brain won't settle. "What calmed you?" Eleanor asked, and immediately wished she could reel it back in. Too personal, too exposed. He leaned forward, forearms resting on his thighs. "Instructions." She frowned. "Instructions." In the field, he said, eyes drifting to some blank spot on the wall, only he could see fear as an instrument panel. "You learn to read it, not fight it. Your hands shake. You slow them down. Your breath spikes. You count to 5. Your vision narrows. You widen your stance, make the world bigger on purpose. Panic's the mind's way of bribing you to forget you know how to survive." "Survive isn't the same as live," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you can't live until you survive." Lightning stitched the sky beyond the glass, silent from this distance. Eleanor watched the white seam fade. "When I was 14, my father told me sleep was an indulgence for people content to be average. I took that as doctrine. I haven't slept right since." "Sounds like he was a surgeon," Daniel said. "He was." Daniel tilted his head. "Emotionally, mine was too." That startled a short breath out of her. She studied his face, the landscape there, a mix of plains and scar lines. "I read the file," she said, and the air changed in the room. "About Claire." His jaw flexed. "You had someone pull it. I had to understand why you hate hospitals and still agree to set one up in your kitchen." "Hate's a lazy word," he said. "Hospitals are chessboards. You have to know who moves which piece. I made a call. I wasn't the one with the title to back it up, and the clock ran out." "You made the right call," she said, more steel in her voice than she intended. They ignored it. He looked at her, something like caution and gratitude at war in his eyes. "Reading the file doesn't give you the right to own the grief." "I'm not trying to. I'm trying to carry some of its weight while you carry mine." The line hung there between them, warm and dangerous. He glanced at her hands still for once, and then away as if refusing a gift he didn't know how to hold. Eleanor broke the silence first. "I invited a board member to the clinical floor today," she said, "not to parade you, to warn him. There will be no trials without my consent, no shortcuts. I'm not a billboard for a cure we don't understand. You just painted one across your own life." "I know." She exhaled a laugh, straightened into a line. "Control is a habit I don't know how to break. Your no is teaching me." A small smile ghosted his mouth. Fear is a warning. Sometimes no is too. They sat like that for a while, the air not heavy, so much as thick with truce. Somewhere below them, a siren murmured through the city, distant as a dream. Eleanor watched his hand scar at the knuckle, faint freckle near the wrist hands that had done more good than most headlines. For the first time, the tremor didn't rise. The room felt held together by something stronger than the glass. What would help, he asked. She blinked. "Right now, tonight." She considered. "Tell me to sleep without making me feel like I'm failing at CEO school." He nodded as if she'd given him an actionable order. "Lie flat. No news, no minutes. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. Count backward from 100 by 3s. If you make it past 80 without cursing, you're doing great." She snorted. "I don't curse." "Congratulations, you're already lying to your doctor." "Partner," she corrected, and the word surprised them both by fitting. When she stood, he stood. The choreography of leaving mattered. No sudden movements, no door slams. She paused at the threshold. "The line about the dragon's heart," she said, hand on the frame. "That wasn't in the original." He shrugged. "I added it for Lily." "It works," she said softly. "So did you." She didn't say. Back in her suite, Eleanor followed his instructions like a recruit in boot camp. Breathe in 4, hold 4, out 6. By 61, the room loosened. By 49, her father's voice was a postcard from a town she no longer lived in. She slept. Not long, not deep, but she slept. Morning found Daniel at Lily's door knocking a gentle rhythm she had made up when she was 7. Status report, he said. Dreamed of flying paper, she mumbled. It didn't burn. Good. Eat something that isn't neon. Lily cracked one eye. Was she there again? The lady. Briefly. Do you like her? The question sat between them like a chess piece she'd pushed into the middle. He thought of the quiet lamp, the way Eleanor had admitted to needing help without turning it into a merger. He thought of the file she'd read and the line she hadn't crossed. I'm learning to, he said. After school drop-off, he texted Eleanor a single line. Those echoes Patel saw keep me looped. She replied with a photo of the morning's labs like proof of faith. Neither added a smiley face, but both read the silence as trust. That afternoon, Eleanor stood in her rooftop garden, thumb hovering over a new message. Lily. She typed, then deleted it. Lines mattered, so she sent it to Daniel instead. If she'd ever want to see the garden, it's open. No press, no strings. She waited for the refusal. What came back after a long pause was 3 words she didn't expect 15 minutes. Supervised. She smiled, small private reel. The door she'd been careful not to kick in had just swung a measured inch. She could live with measured. The heart that made the dragon rare didn't have to blaze to be felt. Tomorrow there would be a bench under ivy cocoa and paper cups, and a girl who asked sharp questions. And after that, a line she would cross without meaning, to the kind of line that could save a life or shatter trust. The rooftop garden was Eleanor's one rebellion against the city's concrete tyranny. Raised beds spilled with rosemary, lavender, and pale roses that had no business surviving this high up. The skyline framed it all like a crown glass and steel bowing to the stubbornness of soil. It had been years since she'd let anyone up here. Investors saw weakness in hobbies. Board members saw eccentricity in dirt. But when the elevator doors hissed open and Daniel stepped out with Lily's hand clasped in his, Eleanor realized she hadn't invited guests. She'd invited something closer to witnesses. Lily gasped as soon as her sneakers hit the stone. It's like a secret park, she said, running forward, ponytail swinging. She bent over a patch of mint and inhaled so dramatically Eleanor had to stifle a laugh. Dad, it smells like toothpaste, but better. Daniel trailed after her slower, his eyes scanning not just the flowers, but the exits, the sightlines. Habit. Soldier's eyes. Eleanor noticed, and without thinking, she said, no cameras. Not here. That earned her the first real flicker of his approval. He joined his daughter by the roses, brushing a hand over the petals. Claire loved these, he murmured. Not to her, but Eleanor heard it anyway. Lily turned toward Eleanor, curiosity sparking. Are you the lady Dad helped? Daniel stiffened. Lily. It's okay, Eleanor cut in. She crouched to the girl's height, her silk blouse brushing against stone. Yes, your dad saved me. Twice if you count making sure I don't work myself into the ground. Lily studied her like a small scientist. Do you say thank you a lot? The question disarmed Eleanor more than any boardroom ambush ever had. Not as much as I should, she admitted. Mom used to say, Lily continued, voice softer now, that saying thank you was like planting a flower. Even if people forgot, it still grew. Daniel's throat tightened, but he said nothing. Eleanor only nodded. Your mom was right. They sat on a low bench under ivy, while Lily peppered Eleanor with questions. What did CEOs actually do? Did she eat lunch at a desk or in a cafeteria? Did she ever fire somebody for being mean? Eleanor answered honestly where she could, gently where she couldn't. For once, her words weren't weaponized, they were bridges. When Lily darted off to chase a butterfly between planters, Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. She doesn't open up to strangers, he said. Not like this. I'm not a stranger, Eleanor replied. I'm her dad's patient. He tilted his head, measuring her. Patients don't invite little girls to their private sanctuaries. She looked away toward the roses trembling in the breeze. Then maybe I'm something else. The line sat between them like a coin neither dared flip. Moments later, Lily returned with a sprig of lavender clutched in her hand. For you, she said, pressing it into Eleanor's palm. So you remember to rest. Eleanor closed her fingers around it, heat prickling the back of her eyes. "Thank you, Lily. I'll keep it." Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the quiet before it grew dangerous. "We should go." But Eleanor wasn't ready to let go. She walked them back to the elevator, heart beating faster with every step. "Come again," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "No strings? I promise." Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say no. He always wanted to say no. But Lily was smiling lavender, dusting her fingers, and something in Eleanor's eyes looked less like power and more like need. "We'll see," he said at last. The doors closed, leaving Eleanor alone with the faint scent of herbs and the echo of a little girl's laughter. For the first time in years, her penthouse didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a waiting room. That night, Marcus stormed into her office unannounced, slamming a file onto her desk. "What is this?" he demanded. Eleanor glanced at the folder Internal Reports, Donor Logs, Redacted Notes. "Evidence," she said coolly. "Evidence you're hiding him." "Do you realize what you're sitting on? Pharmaceutical firms are sniffing at the gates. The board is restless. They'll sell you out if they think you're protecting him." Her hand stilled on the desk. "Then let them try. This isn't just about you anymore." Marcus's voice cracked with rare desperation. "You can't save a man and save this company at the same time. You'll have to choose." Eleanor rose every inch of her posture, radiating steel. "I already chose. The man who saved me doesn't owe his life to vultures. He owes it to his daughter." Marcus stared at her like she'd grown another head. "You're falling for him." Eleanor's silence was louder than denial. He shook his head, almost pitying. "That will be your ruin." When he left, the office felt colder. Eleanor sat back down, lavender still tucked beside her keyboard, and whispered to herself, "Or maybe it will be my salvation." She didn't know that below her, Daniel was staring at his own phone, reading the unsent text on his screen. "She's not what I expected." He deleted it before his thumb could betray him. But the truth had already taken root. And roots once planted have a way of breaking through concrete. The first snow of the season dusted the city like powdered sugar-coating cars and sidewalks in a hush that made everything feel temporary. Daniel tightened Lily's scarf as they stepped out of their building, his breath fogging the morning air. He had promised her hot chocolate before school, a rare indulgence, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but instinct pressed his thumb to answer. Daniel Eleanor's voice came through, low, urgent. "I need you." His pulse spiked. "What happened?" "I collapsed during the board meeting. They called an ambulance, but I convinced them to bring me home instead. Please." Daniel looked at Lily, who was staring up at him with wide, worried eyes. He hesitated only a beat before crouching down. "Change of plans, kiddo. We're going to see Miss Hayes." Lily nodded without protest. She had grown used to these sudden turns, but even she could tell this one was different. They arrived at Eleanor's penthouse within the hour. Marcus was there, pacing the foyer like a trapped wolf. His expression soured when Daniel walked in, Lily at his side. "You," Marcus spat. "Of course she called you." Daniel ignored him, striding straight toward the bedroom where Eleanor lay pale and trembling against silk sheets. The lavender sprig Lily had given her rested in a glass beside the bed, wilted but present. "You should have gone to the hospital," Daniel muttered, already pulling gloves from his bag. "They can't help me," Eleanor whispered. "You can." As Daniel worked, Lily perched quietly at the corner of the bed, her small hand brushing Eleanor's wrist. "You'll be okay," she said softly. "Dad always fixes things." Eleanor's lips curved faintly. "I'm starting to believe that." But Marcus wasn't silent. He hovered in the doorway, his voice sharp with frustration. "This is insane. Do you understand what you're risking?" "If anyone finds out," Daniel cut him off without looking up. "If you don't want to help, leave." "I am helping," Marcus shot back. "I'm protecting her legacy. This circus of secrecy will destroy everything she's built." Eleanor's eyes opened steel, flashing through her weakness. "My legacy isn't numbers on a balance sheet, Marcus. It's people. And you just don't get that." For once, Marcus had no comeback. He turned on his heel and stalked out, the echo of his footsteps fading like a retreat. Hours later, Eleanor's breathing steadied, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Daniel stayed by her side until she fell asleep, then gathered his things. But as he reached the door, a faint whisper stopped him. "Don't go." He turned back. Eleanor's eyes were half open, glassy with fatigue, but intent. Stay. Daniel froze. He wasn't used to being needed, wanted. Maybe by people with motives, but not needed in the raw human sense that Eleanor's voice carried. He glanced at Lily, who had curled up in an armchair, fast asleep with her jacket still on. Just for a while, Eleanor murmured, her lashes drifting shut again. So Daniel sat back down, silent, in the dim room, the city lights casting fractured patterns across the floor. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a soldier on leave or a widower marking time. He felt like a man standing on the edge of something terrifyingly alive. The following days blurred into a fragile rhythm, treatments in secret Lily's cautious acceptance, Eleanor's strength waxing and waning like the moon. But whispers grew louder. A leaked photo of Daniel entering the penthouse sparked headlines, "Unknown man linked to reclusive CEO." Daniel's phone rang off the hook with blocked numbers. His building superintendent gave him odd looks. Even Lily mentioned classmates whispering about her dad and the rich lady. One evening, as Daniel packed away supplies, Eleanor touched his arm. "You don't deserve this kind of scrutiny." He shook his head. "I've been under worse. That's not what I mean." She searched his face. "Your life, it matters. Lily's life matters. And I—" She stopped, words tangling. What Daniel asked. Voice rougher than he intended. Eleanor's gaze dropped. "I'm afraid of what I'm starting to want." He swallowed hard, every instinct telling him to put up walls. But Lily's laughter echoed faintly from the other room, grounding him. "Want isn't always a bad thing," he said quietly. The air between them thickened heavy with everything unspoken. And then the doorbell rang. Eleanor stiffened. Daniel's body tensed. He opened the door to find two men in suits, corporate polished but predatory in posture. One held a folder, the other a smirk. "Mr. Carter," the first one asked, "we need a word about your relationship with Ms. Hayes." Behind him, Eleanor's voice rang out sharp as steel. "Leave him alone." But they didn't flinch. "Ms. Hayes," the man said smoothly, "if you continue down this path, you'll lose everything. The board won't protect you. The shareholders won't forgive you." And as for him, his eyes flicked toward Daniel. Men like him always end up discarded. Daniel clenched his fists, but Eleanor rose from the bed, unsteady yet resolute. "Then maybe it's time I stop caring what they forgive." The men exchanged a look before retreating, leaving tension in their wake. When the door clicked shut, Eleanor sagged and Daniel caught her before she could fall. She leaned into him, whispering, "They won't stop." "I know," Daniel said. His jaw hardened, "but neither will I." And for the first time, Eleanor believed him. The boardroom felt colder that morning, as if the HVAC had decided to side with fear. Frosted glass boxed in a dozen polished faces, while graphs glowed clinical blue across a wall. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, jacket buttoned, pulse steady, because she willed it to be. Marcus stood at the screen with a remote and the glint of a preacher about to sell salvation. "Preclinical simulations are promising," he said, clicking to a slide of DNA ladders and tidy green checkmarks. CRISPR-based correction of Eleanor's autoimmune marker, replicable, controlled hours. He let the last word linger like an oath. "We can start compassionate use in-house. Today." Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "With respect, promising isn't safe. There are off-target edits we don't fully—" Marcus sliced a hand through the air. "What isn't safe is running a Fortune 100 company on mystery blood from a man we don't control." All eyes slid to Eleanor. She felt the lavender sprig in her pocket. Lily's sprig pressed softly against the fabric, a small, fragrant defiance. "No gene editing," she said. "Not until it's truly ready. We maintain the protocol. Dr. Cross oversees it." A murmur. Marcus's smile strained. "Your condition is showing neurological echoes, Eleanor. REM disruption, memory compression." How long before the headlines say the CEO can't remember her own password? Eleanor leaned in, voice low. "If you ever weaponize my health in this room, again, you'll be dialing HR from the sidewalk." Silence cracked. Then she stood, dismissed the room with a nod, and walked out. Hands steady, knees weaker than she'd admit. Outside, the day smelled like old snow and roasted chestnuts drifting up from a cart on the corner. She found a bench under an anemic plane tree and sat until the world lost its edges. Her phone vibrated, Patel sending Labs her assistant, sending crises, and a number she didn't recognize, local insistent. She ignored it. Across town, school let out with its usual flood of backpacks and breath clouds. Daniel waited outside the gate, hands in his coat pockets, watching for ponytails and neon sneakers. Lily barreled into him, skidded, and laughed into his jacket. He breathed in the smell of crayons and peppermint gum and thought for a dangerous heartbeat. Keep this. Keep everything exactly like this. Mr. Cross, a voice said. Daniel turned. A man blocked their path. Tall pressed charcoal suit smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marcus Daniel said flatly, Walk with me, Marcus said. He didn't ask. They moved to the outer sidewalk where slush gleamed at the curb. Lily fell half a step behind, antennae up. Eleanor won't tell you this, Marcus began. So I will. Your blood is lighting up her brain like a pinball machine. The echoes, Patel mentioned. They don't go away. Daniel's jaw tightened. If you're worried about her, try being less of a vulture. Marcus ignored that. We have a path that doesn't require you a CRISPR protocol. We can patent control roll out globally. He looked at Lily as if she were a ledger line. You continuing this little savior act is reckless. If her board turns on her and you'll be collateral damage. They will burn you to purify the altar. Lily's hand found Daniel's. He pulled her close. Stay away from us. Or what Marcus asked softly. You'll bleed on me. Daniel took a step forward. The air between them thinned. Enough, Lily said, surprising both men with the steel in her small voice. We're going, she told her dad. Daniel turned his back on Marcus and didn't look back. That night, the city exhaled into drizzle. Radiators hissed in Daniel's apartment above the flower shop. Somewhere below, water dripped in metal buckets his landlord never fixed. Lily sprawled on the rug, coloring tongue between her teeth. Daniel sterilized equipment by the glow of the stove light. The kitchen a choreography. He could do half-asleep swab, seal set, breathe. Eleanor was due in 30 minutes for a quick check, a top-off under strict limits. He texted, running 5 late. Bodega line. Don't kill me, she replied with a dot, and then, bring the cinnamon tea Lily likes. He smiled despite himself and grabbed a box from the shelf. He left Lily with instructions the way single parents do, 1 foot out the door, 1 eye still in the room. Teapot off by 1:15. Doors locked. I'll be right back. You good? She saluted him with a wooden spoon. Indomitable, she said, proud to use last week's vocabulary trophy. Down the block, Daniel cut through the bodega, paid in cash, and jogged toward home, plastic bag biting his fingers. The drizzle fattened, tires hissed past. He turned the corner and the world went orange. Flame pulsed behind the florist's glass like a heartbeat. Smoke ribboned upward in black oily columns. Someone shouted. A car alarm began its stupid, useless wail. Daniel's bag hit the sidewalk. He ran. Lily. His voice tore out of him raw and animal. Lily. A neighbor grabbed his arm. Don't, Daniel, don't. The stairs are... He tore free. Heat slapped him like a wall. The building breathed smoke in great greedy gulps. A cough cracked through the din somewhere above, high and thin and terrified. And then a shadow darted through the smoke at the entry coat, flaring hair, wild, coughing hard. Eleanor. Daniel saw her and didn't, the way a drowning man recognizes shore without naming it. She shoved her shoulder against the door, disappeared into the black. Time became sound, crackle, cough. Someone screaming, call 911. The deep belly roar of something structural giving way. Daniel hit the first step and dropped low because muscle memory outranked panic. Lily, he yelled into his sleeve. Here. The voice was tiny and huge at the same time. Dad Eleanor emerged half-bent from the corridor, her arm hooked under Lily's dragging lungs, scraping the air for something that wouldn't burn them. Lily's face was streaked with soot. Eyes too big. A beam somewhere popped with a gunshot crack. Daniel lunged, scooped his daughter into his arms. She clamped onto his neck with small iron hands. Eleanor stumbled and would have gone down if he hadn't grabbed her elbow. Together they staggered toward the square of daylight that meant outside, that meant cold, that meant air, that didn't taste like pennies and ash. The threshold fought them. Fire licked the doorframe, greedy for hair and skin. A neighbor with a garden hose, wholly ridiculous garden hose, sprayed a pathetic halo that still felt like mercy. They burst onto the sidewalk and collapsed on wet concrete. Lily coughed until she gagged. Daniel patted her back, whispering nonsense, the sound fathers make when language breaks. Eleanor rolled onto her side, retching smoke palms blister pink. A paramedic dropped to his knees and pressed oxygen over her mouth. "Easy, ma'am. Easy." Daniel looked up through tears he didn't register. "Why, how were you?" Eleanor pulled the mask away long enough to rasp broken cinnamon tea. Of course, he had texted. She had come early. She had seen the orange bloom and run in before anyone could stop her. Fire engines screamed to a stop. Boots thundered, hoses hissed. Orders snapped through air that stank of plastic and old wood and loss. The florist stood crying in the street in a nightgown and coat. A teenage neighbor told a firefighter he'd seen a man in a long coat loitering by the door 20 minutes before smoking, pacing, watching. Daniel's head snapped toward the kid, throat aching. The firefighter scribbled without looking up, said something about faulty wiring, about how old buildings go up like tinder. Daniel stared at the windows he had learned for years. The one with the chip Lily called a comet. The kitchen with the plant that never died, and felt a cold that wasn't the drizzle settle in his bones. They rode to St. Luke's in separate ambulances, Lily and Daniel in one, Eleanor in another. Lily drifted against his chest, oxygen hissing its thin comfort as lights washed the ceiling in red, white. He kissed her soot-tangled hair and tasted ash. In the ER, Lily's O2 rebounded. A nurse tucked a warmed blanket around her shoulders. Her fingers never let go of Daniel's shirt. Across the hall, Eleanor's cough racked the curtained bay. The sound pulled at him with a rope. When Patel appeared, tie-crooked face, storm-tired. Daniel had to brace his hands on his knees to stop from shaking. "She's stable," Patel said. "Burns on the palms, smoke inhalation. She'll need observation, but she's okay." His gaze flicked to Lily. "We're fine," Daniel lied out of habit. By morning, what was left of the apartment was a black ribcage against a gray sky. Charred beams, the gutted throat of a stairwell, a smell that would never leave his clothes. The landlord stood with a clipboard and a shrug. The fire captain said wiring too quickly. The teenage neighbor repeated his detail about the man in the coat. The captain's pen kept up, but Daniel saw something else in the man's eyes. The resignation of a city that eats cause for breakfast. Eleanor arrived in borrowed sweats and bandaged hands, her color too pale for any room not fluorescent. Security hovered a respectful distance away. She took in the wreckage and then looked at Lily, who stood under Daniel's arm, smaller than she had been yesterday. "Move into the Hayes compound," Eleanor said. "No preface, no sales pitch. Today. Private floor, guards, keys in your pocket before sundown. I'll make the calls." Daniel stared at the place where his life had been. A paper crown Lily had made at 8 clung to a wet piece of plaster. He swallowed. "No. We can't live under your name like bad headlines waiting to happen." "You nearly lost your daughter," Eleanor said. Her voice shook and she didn't hide it. "Because you are standing too close to a world that wants to control what it can't understand. Let me protect you." He turned eyes hot. "Protect me? You can't even protect yourself in your own boardroom." She flinched, then steadied. "I can protect you better than this." She gestured at the carcass of home. "Better than ash." Wind lifted smoke into their faces. Lily pressed her forehead into Daniel's ribs. He put a hand on her hair without looking away from Eleanor. "This wasn't wiring. You know that." She didn't answer. The not answer said yes. He nodded once, a soldier's nod to a fact that hurts. "Then we're leaving." Where Eleanor asked the word thin. "Anywhere this city can't find us." He looked down at Lily. "Pack what you can carry," he said, the cruelty of it catching in his throat because there was nothing left to pack. Eleanor stepped closer, eyes shining bandages bright against gray morning. "You are not just a donor," she whispered. Daniel's voice was sand. "I was never just a donor." He shifted Lily's weight as if to prove the point and to remind himself what mattered. He turned to go. She reached into her coat and pressed a slim folder into his free hand. Back up, she said. Everything we've learned, your notes, my labs. If you start over, start with the truth. She swallowed. Don't come back because you think you owe me. He closed his fingers around the folder and felt the heat of the building seep into the paper. He searched her face for something to blame and found only the wreckage in her eyes that matched his own. If I come back, he said, voice low, it'll be because I can't stay away. He walked Lily to the car, the drizzle flattening into a steady, unromantic rain. Eleanor stood alone on the sidewalk, bandaged hands clenched at her sides, watching the taillights disappear into the gray. Behind her, the building hissed and steamed and kept its secrets out of habit. Far uptown, Marcus stared at a photo of flames on his phone news site banner, headline, comments blooming like mold. He set the device down and closed his eyes a moment longer than a busy man ever allows himself. When he opened them, the mask slid back into place. He picked up a pen and began drafting an email to the board about the necessity of decisive action. By nightfall, Daniel's number would stop appearing on Eleanor's screen. By week's end, the city would have a new scandal. But for now, there was only a father driving through rain toward a nowhere that wasn't this, a girl curled against him and a woman on a sidewalk whispering into a wind that didn't care, please be safe. They checked into a long, low motel off the interstate where the rooms smelled faintly of bleach and old rain. Neon flickered outside in a cursive that had lost 2 letters C. Breeze now read as E.A. Rees, which felt about right. Daniel carried the single duffel because there was nothing else left to carry. Lily clutched her stuffed owl like a passport through customs. Room 212 had thin curtains and a view of the parking lot's one stubborn palm tree. The bedspread was patterned with a geometry that tried too hard to be cheerful. Daniel locked the door, slid the security latch and did the small parent audit window latch smoke detector test, the chain on the connecting door that led nowhere. Lily set the owl on the table, then turned slowly in the muted light as if orienting herself on a new planet. Are we living here, she asked. For a little while, Daniel said. His voice was tired but steady. Temporary. He didn't say the word safe because it had always felt like a jinx. She nodded, brave in the way children learn to be when the adults they love are out of air. Can we at least get a cereal bowl? He almost laughed. Yeah, Bug. We can swing a bowl. They bought 2 at a dollar store and a cheap kettle. Lily arranged them on the motel's tiny counter like they were moving into a castle. Daniel called the clinic, took unpaid leave, told no stories. He powered down the phone at night, the hum of the freeway replacing the radiator's hiss. Sleep came in splinters. On the 3rd evening, someone knocked. Daniel tensed, every ugly possibility skittering through him. He peered through the peephole. Eleanor stood there in a gray sweater and jeans, her hands wrapped in clean bandages, a paper bag looped around her wrist. No security, no entourage, just rain beating on her eyelashes. He opened the door halfway. How did you... You paid cash, she said. You forgot about the flower shop loyalty card you used down the road for tea. She lifted the bag. Cinnamon and bowls. He should have closed the door. He'd promised himself. Instead, he stepped back. Lily's brushing her teeth. Eleanor entered like a person stepping into someone's grief on purpose. Quiet eyes lowered, careful not to touch anything she hadn't been offered. She set the bag on the counter and pulled out the tea. 2 ceramic bowls with a blue rim, a box of the cheap cookies Lily liked. I'm not here to drag you back, she said. I just couldn't let the last thing between us be smoke. You shouldn't be here. He didn't put heat behind it, only fact. They watch you. I took the freight elevator, she said, and almost smiled at her own ridiculousness. I won't stay. Lily patted out hair damp and pajamas too bright for the room. She froze, then beamed. You found us. She said it with a child's faith, not suspicion. I promised cinnamon tea, Eleanor said, throat tight. They made it on the little kettle. 3 paper cups on the windowsill, rain ticking the glass, the parking lot lights throwing moving shadows like a film reel. Lily talked in bursts about the motel vending machine and how the lady at the front desk had a cat named Elvis. Eleanor listened as if this were a board presentation, nodding with the gravity of someone being told state secrets. When Lily drifted to sleep under the motel's thin blanket, Daniel and Eleanor stood by the door, voices low. You shouldn't have gone into that building, he said. You could have... The word failed him. So could you, she said. But you didn't ask my permission. That's not how my life works, and it's not how mine does either, she said. Not anymore. They were quiet. Then Eleanor took a breath that sounded like it scraped her ribs. I came for one more thing. He braced. I want to say goodbye before the part where we pretend we're strangers again. Something in his chest shifted off its axis. Don't do that. Do what make it clean when it isn't. He rubbed his forehead. I don't know how to be anything for you that doesn't put Lily in a crosshairs. I know she said. That's why I won't ask you to be anything, for now. The last two words landed like a small, stubborn flag on a windy hill. She left the bowls, the tea a folded envelope with a prepaid phone card, and a note that read, Use only if you want me to hear your voice, not because you think you owe me mine. Then she hugged Lily a second time at the door, the kind of quick, fierce squeeze adults do when they're practicing at letting go. Days bled. Daniel found a laundromat 2 blocks over with washers that shuddered like old men clearing their throats. Lily learned the pattern of the ice machine's clunks. They lived in the small ritual cereal in the blue-rimmed bowls homework at the little table walks around the lot to name the cars like animals. He said temporary so many times it became a lullaby. Back in the city, the temperature of Eleanor's world dropped 5 degrees. Her PR team spun silence into strategy. The board met twice in a week. The second time, they didn't invite her. Patel appeared in her penthouse with a face that made her stomach go to ground. The markers, he said, laying out the labs. They're slipping. How long? He didn't look up. 10 days, if we're lucky. Her world clicked into its old, brutal gear timelines. Contingencies calls. Marcus arrived with a crisp binder and a predator's patience. The trial is ready. You can sign and be in a chair by morning. I said no. She answered. Until it's safe. Define safe, he said, because the alternative is a countdown. He slid a form toward her like a dealer offering one last hand. She pictured a night of plastic bowls and cinnamon steam and a girl who had pressed a sprig of lavender into her palm. She pushed the form back. I won't let you patent panic. Marcus's jaw flexed. This isn't about patents. It's about keeping you breathing long enough to be useful. Useful, she repeated the word like iron in her mouth. To whom? To the work, he said. To the thousands watching you to see if hope is a business plan. She stood so quickly the chair legs scraped. Get out. He left with a look that said, You just wrote your own obituary. The next 48 hours turned into a set of rings closing insomnia tremors, a blackout in the shower, where she woke with the tile cold against her cheek. Patel stationed a nurse in the suite. Press releases went out that said nothing and everything Hayes Biotech CEO to reduce public appearances during routine treatment. The markets dipped like a heartbeat missing a beat. By the 5th day, the neurologic echoes that had been blips on Patel's scan became stuttering lines. Words slipped sideways in her mouth board came out, bird. Marcus became Mercy, which made her laugh until she nearly cried. She hated that the human body betrayed with such humiliating imprecision. At dawn on day 6, she collapsed at the breakfast counter, shattering a glass that bled across the marble in a red Rorschach. The nurse called Patel. Patel called the ambulance. Eleanor argued for walking. Her knees argued back with a fast, precise mutiny. St. Luke swallowed her again, familiar fluorescence cold adhesive circles on her chest, a machine's metronome insisting on time. She heard the words from the far end of a tunnel progressing infusions window 10 days. Someone threaded her IV with the same practiced tenderness Daniel used. She closed her eyes and saw the motel curtain thin and unconvincing against the world. Marcus arrived with a tie you could cut your finger on. Sign it, he said softly, because soft sounded like mercy to people who didn't know him. We start tonight. She stared at the line where her name would go at the pen placed like a verdict at Patel's careful look that said, I will follow whatever you choose. The world fuzzed at the edges. She pushed the clipboard back. If I die, she said voice hoarse, it won't be as a lab note you smuggled into my veins because you were tired of waiting. He stared at her, then nodded. Once the kind of nod that contains both defeat and reloading. Night did that thing hospital nights do, stretched without moving. Machines chirped, shoes squeaked, someone cried 3 rooms down, and then didn't. Eleanor drifted and surfaced, listening for a voice that wasn't in the room. She thought about the prepaid card and the envelope and the note's small mercy. She didn't reach for the phone. Across the interstate in the motel's thin light, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling's spiderweb crack that Lily had named the map. The motel AC cycled on with a rattle. The vending machine thumped somewhere like a late heartbeat. His phone, kept alive now, against his rules, buzzed across the nightstand wood. Whitmore Medical had once appeared there. Now it was Hayes Tower nurse desk, one too many words to ignore. He didn't answer. Not the first time, not the second. On the third, Lily rolled over and sat up. "Dad," she said, voice small but clear in the dark. "If it's her, we should pick up." He closed his eyes because sometimes love is the order you don't want to obey. The phone buzzed again, insistent as a pulse. He didn't touch it, not yet. The call went unanswered, and yet Eleanor could almost feel him on the other end, silent, stubborn, present. Her chest ached more from that absence than from the IV tape tugging her skin. She pressed the prepaid card into Patel's hand the next morning. "If I can't reach him, you try." Patel nodded, though his eyes showed worry deeper than protocol. "You're running out of time, Eleanor. The numbers don't lie." "I know," she said, her voice thin, "but people aren't numbers." Meanwhile at the motel, Daniel poured weak coffee into a styrofoam cup and carried it outside. Dawn was peeling the sky open with pale pink. He hadn't shaved, hadn't slept, but the decision clung to him: stay out of her fire or risk dragging Lily straight into it. He stood by the railing, watching trucks rumble down the interstate, when Lily slipped her hand into his. "She sounded tired, didn't she?" Lily asked quietly. Daniel looked down. "You were supposed to be asleep." "I couldn't," she said. "Dad, what if she needs you the way you needed her medicine, that cut him in a place no wound had touched?" He pulled her close, kissed the top of her head, but said nothing. 2 days later, Patel found him anyway. He appeared outside the laundromat where Daniel was folding Lily's shirts, his suit creased from hours of no rest. "She doesn't have a week left," Patel said flatly. "Whatever you're waiting for, it's already too late to wait." Daniel's fists tightened around a t-shirt until the cotton squeaked. "If I go near her, I put Lily in the middle of something she didn't choose." Patel's reply was brutal but true. "If you don't, Eleanor won't live long enough to choose anything." That night, Daniel sat with Lily on the motel bed, cartoons buzzing in the background. He explained as best he could. She listened with her knees pulled up to her chest. When he finished, she whispered, "I don't want her to die, Dad, but I don't want to lose you either." "You won't lose me," he promised, though promises weighed heavier than they used to. By morning, they were in a cab headed back toward the city skyline. At St. Luke's, Eleanor drifted between sleep and waking. Marcus stood at her bedside with 2 other board members murmuring about optics. "If she doesn't consent to the trial, we'll spin her refusal as courage," one said. "Spin." Eleanor rasped, eyes flickering open. "I'm not your headline." Marcus bent close, his whisper like a knife's flat edge. "Then stop acting like you are his. Do you think no one's noticed you've already lost your company? Must you lose your dignity too?" Eleanor's gaze sharpened despite the haze. Better dignity than soul. When they left, Patel lingered. He pressed his hand gently on her wrist. "It's coming," he said softly. Her pulse fluttered under his touch. "You're sure I'm sure?" It was evening when Daniel finally stepped into the ward, Lily's small hand locked in his. Eleanor turned her head on the pillow, and the sight of them made her breath hitch. She looked paler than the sheets, but her eyes lit like someone had lit a candle in a church at midnight. "You came," she whispered. Lily reached her first, climbing carefully onto the chair by the bed. "We brought the lavender," she said, pulling the crumpled sprig from her pocket. Eleanor laughed, a weak, broken laugh, but real. "My little healer." Daniel stayed standing, jaw tight, as if stepping closer would commit him to a war he'd sworn off. Finally, Eleanor lifted a trembling hand toward him. He hesitated, then enclosed it in his own. Warmth traveled both directions. "They want to cut me open with experiments," she said. "But the only cure that ever touched me was sitting in a motel drinking cinnamon tea." His throat burned. "Eleanor." "No speeches," she murmured. "Just promise me you'll take care of her if I already promised," he cut in voice cracking. "But don't you dare hand her to me like that." Her eyelids fluttered shut, not in surrender, but in exhaustion. Machines hummed. Doctors watched, but the moment belonged only to them. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep in a chair beside the bed, Daniel stepped out into the hall where Patel was waiting. "Tell me straight," he said. "She won't last another 48 hours, Patel admitted. Unless Patel looked at him with the quiet weight of a man who hated the truth he carried. "Unless you let us take more of your blood. Not samples, full transfusion." Daniel's body went cold. "You mean drain me for her? I mean save her," Patel said. The hallway was quiet but alive, with distant beeps and wheels rolling on linoleum. Daniel pressed his palms against his face. He'd survived war, loneliness, and raising a child alone. But this choice felt like it could break him in two. Inside the room, Eleanor stirred, whispering Lily's name in her sleep. Daniel heard it even through the door, and in that fragile sound he knew what he had to do. The morning rose slow and gray over St. Luke's, the kind of light that couldn't decide whether to stay. Machines blinked their indifferent constellations in Eleanor's room. The corridor smelled like coffee that had boiled too long. Daniel stood at the window with his sleeves shoved to his elbows, feeling the cold glass through his forearms. He had made his decision in the night, and it sat in him like a stone. If his blood could buy her another day, he'd pay. Patel entered with a folder, hair sleep crushed to one side. "We'll run compatibility again," he said, "but everything points the same direction. Your markers are what her system responds to." Daniel didn't turn from the window. "How much?" "Enough to be careful," Patel said. "But not so much you can't go home on your own 2 feet." "Home," Daniel repeated softly, as if trying the word on. There was no home right now, only a motel and a daughter who slept in chairs without complaining. He faced Patel. "Let's do it." They moved like a team that had a plan: consent forms, labs, a nurse threading a line into the crook of Daniel's arm, while Eleanor, drowsy but lucid, watched from the bed. Lily, blanket ponytail, stubborn chin dozed, curled in the visitor's chair, the lavender sprig crushed in her fist like a talisman. "You sure?" Eleanor asked, her voice sanded down by the night. "No," he said, "but we don't have time to wait for sure." The first draw began. Daniel watched the bag darken with his blood, that ordinary miracle that never stopped looking like something supernatural under fluorescent light. He did what he always did when minutes needed to pass, counted breaths. In 4 hold, 4, out 6. Somewhere in the hall, a food cart rattled past like a train losing screws. Then a sound sliced the morning open, an alarm high and insistent, followed by a nurse's voice too calm to be okay. "Peds Bay now." Patel was out the door before Daniel could ask. The nurse at Daniel's elbow froze with the kind of stillness that listens. Over the alarm, a smaller sound like a bird hitting a window came from the visitor's chair. Lily slid sideways, the blanket spilling. Her eyes fluttered, unfixed. Lily Daniels said the word, breaking halfway through. He was across the room before he knew he'd moved. "Hey, Bug." "Hey!" Her lips were pale. A tremor ran through her like a ripple under skin. Eleanor sat up too fast and swayed, grabbing the bed rail. "What's happening?" Nurses poured in as if conjured oxygen, a monitor rolling on squeaky wheels, a pulse oximeter clipped to a small finger that had traced dragons last week on motel stationery. Patel's voice cut through tight. "Her O2's dropping. She's hypotensive." Daniel's world narrowed to the space inside his daughter's ribs. From the smoke. "Likely delayed complications," Patel said, already moving. "We need blood." "O negative." "Crossmatch." He glanced at a nurse and she shook her head, eyes already apologizing. "She's formed antibodies from prior exposures." "We can't use mine," Daniel said, feeling the floor slip. He had bought strangers time with this body, and now it couldn't pay its own debt. "Find someone. Anyone." "We're trying," the nurse said, and Daniel hated the way trying sounded like a prayer over an empty dish. Eleanor swung her legs over the side of the bed. "I'm O negative." Patel turned on her so fast his ID badge slapped his chest. "Absolutely not. You're not stable." "I'm stable enough to lie here dying," she said, voice sharp with a kind of clarity he hadn't heard in days. She gripped the rail, stood swayed. Daniel's hands were under her elbows before she asked. "Take it," she told Patel. Now. Eleanor. Daniel started. She met his eyes and he saw the boardroom steel and the rooftop softness knit into one decision. She's your daughter, she said quietly, which means she's part of my life too. No, he said, because the word was muscle memory. You don't get to buy our safety with your body. She took his hand and placed it flat over Lily's small, fluttering rib cage. Archie repeated, "Please." It took 10 seconds for Patel to capitulate, and 3 more to wave a nurse toward the transfusion bay. Eleanor didn't sit in the wheelchair. She refused it like an insult. She walked unsteady and furious, bandaged hands fisted at her sides. Daniel hovered and hated that he had to. The world narrowed to 2 rooms moving in parallel in one. Lily's monitor spiking and dipping, a nurse murmuring, it's okay in a rhythm no machine could count. In the other, Eleanor lying still, jaw set as a bag filled from veins that were already light. The blood looked the same in both rooms, stubborn, red, alive. Time took its cruel, sweet time. 10 minutes. 20. Daniel stood at Lily's bedside counting breaths because numbers were the only thing that didn't lie to him today. Eleanor's nurse called for juice, then water, then another blanket. Patel ghosted between rooms' eyes, tracking 3 monitors at once, mouth a thin line of math and prayer. At 42 minutes, Lily's O2 crept upward as if embarrassed to have fallen. At 50, her color shifted from winter to early spring. At 56, she blinked and found Daniel, and the sound he made then wasn't a word so much as a breaking open. He bent, kissed her forehead, and swore under his breath with gratitude. "Hey, Bug," he said, voice wrecked. "You scared me." "Thought I was flying," she whispered, a little dazed, like the paper dragon. He laughed, the kind of laugh that leaves salt in your mouth. "Stay on the ground for now." He turned already halfway to the other room and almost collided with the nurse running toward him. "She's hypotensive," the nurse said. "We're managing it." Eleanor's room smelled like metal and citrus wipes. She lay pale as the sheet and IV dripping clear, her lips too colorless for comfort. Patel looked up from the monitors. "She'll need fluids." "Rest." She gave more than she had. Daniel moved to her side the way his feet always found ground they trusted. He took her hand. It was cool, delicate knuckles, surprisingly soft for a woman who carried the weight of cities. "You weren't supposed to do this," he said. Her eyelids fluttered. She lifted them with effort. "You weren't supposed to save me either," she whispered, a ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "But here we are." He bowed his head over her hand. "You can't keep risking you." "She is mine too," Eleanor said, so soft he almost missed it. Not "she feels like mine," or "I care about her like mine." Just the present tense, unarguable and quiet. Something in him that had been barricaded since a nurse handed him a death certificate years ago gave way like a door after the right key. He felt it not as fireworks, but as the city's lights turning on block by block, dusk to night, ordinary and miraculous all at once. Patel busied himself with lines and numbers tacked, sluicing him to the corner of the room. Daniel sat and leaned close. "I don't have words for this," he said, honest as a confession. "I've been a lot of things, son soldier, doc, widower, single dad. None of them prepared me for you walking into a burning building for my child." She blinked slowly, a tear escaping because the body betrays us in the best ways too. "I didn't walk. I ran." "Of course you did," he said, a laugh breaking through the wreckage. He wiped the tear with the pad of his thumb like it might set off another alarm. Through the wall, Lily coughed, then giggled at something a nurse said. The sound slid under the door and lifted the room an inch. Eleanor exhaled a fragile shudder, turning to a steadier tide. "You could have died," he said, the truth landing late but heavy. "You would have," she replied, and his chest hurt in a place that didn't know how to hold gratitude and terror at the same time. He lowered his forehead to the back of her hand the way he had seen men pray in field tents when no chaplain was in sight. He didn't ask for miracles. He had just witnessed one measured in milliliters. He asked for the smaller thing, time enough to say what mattered before someone pulled the curtain, or the fire alarm, or the plug. "You're not my patient anymore," he said softly. "You're the person who makes everything make sense." Her mouth curved. "That's not science." "No," he said. "It's something more dangerous. Patel cleared his throat with an apologetic little cough. Her pressure's climbing. That's good. He checked his watch. I'll monitor Lily through the hour. He paused, then added without looking at either of them. You did the right thing. When he left the room, sighed. Eleanor's eyes drifted to the ceiling tiles scuffed like old snow. I used to think power was the only currency that mattered, she murmured. Then you gave me time. And today I gave some of it back. You gave more than time, he said. They sat together while the drip ticked and the monitors measured and the city shrugged toward noon. Through the window, gray light turned softer like it had been told a secret and promised to keep it. Daniel held Eleanor's hand because there are moments when that is the only honest medicine left, and he had finally remembered how to practice it. Across the hall, Lily slept pink, returning to her cheeks the lavender sprig on the tray like a little flag planted on a new planet. In the pocket of Daniel's jacket, the prepaid card pressed against his chest. He didn't need it anymore. The voice he had been waiting to hear was here, labored but alive, refusing to apologize for loving in present tense. The dragon in the bedtime story had learned that it wasn't fire that made it rare. It was its heart. Daniel looked at the woman who had set hers beating in time with his daughters and felt the war inside him lower its weapon. He didn't call it love yet. He called it the thing he would walk toward even through smoke. The night that followed was the first in weeks that didn't feel like a siege. The hospital quieted into its strange rhythm monitors, clicking janitors humming under their breath wheels of a cart squeaking down the corridor like a metronome. In room 417, Daniel sat between two beds, one hand resting on his daughter's blanket, the other still threaded through Eleanor's fingers. He hadn't planned to stay in both places at once, but somehow that was exactly where he was meant to be. Lily stirred just before midnight, blinking sleep-heavy eyes and clutching her crushed sprig of lavender. "Daddy," she whispered, and he leaned in instantly. "Right here, Bug." She studied Eleanor across the room where the CEO-turned-patient lay, pale but steady. "She saved me, didn't she?" Daniel swallowed hard, the words pressing against him. "Yeah," he said finally, smoothing her hair back. She gave what she could. Lily smiled faintly, her small voice stronger than it had been in days. "Then she's family too." The sentence landed like a flare in the dark. Daniel kissed her forehead, but inside something vast shifted. He didn't correct her. He couldn't. By morning, sunlight cut through blinds and painted stripes across Eleanor's face. She looked less like porcelain and more like herself again, steel softened by exhaustion, but alive. Daniel offered her water. She took it with a hand that shook slightly, then passed it back with a look that made him pause. "You didn't leave," she said softly. "I couldn't." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Good." Patel entered, then flipping through charts with his usual briskness. "Vitals are stabilizing. Both of you," he said, glancing from Eleanor to Lily, "owe this man more than you realize." Eleanor turned her gaze toward Daniel. "He won't let me thank him." Daniel gave a half smile. "You already did." Patel raised a brow. "And you'll need to keep thanking him in small ways. Both of you are still fragile." He scribbled a note, then looked up. No heroics for a while. But as the days passed, heroics were exactly what it felt like. Eleanor insisted on sitting up sooner than she should have, pale but determined. She kept asking Lily about school, about drawings, about the paper dragon still folded on the bedside table. Lily in turn told stories that filled the sterile room with color. Daniel listened, watching the way their laughter braided together. One evening, as rain streaked the window, Eleanor turned to Daniel. "Why did you really do it?" "What do you mean?" "Not just because you could," she pressed. "Not just because you're a doctor or a soldier," or she gestured weakly, a man who can't walk away from someone in pain. "Why me?" The silence stretched. Daniel glanced at Lily, asleep in her chair, then back to Eleanor. "Because for the first time since my wife died, I felt like saving someone else might save me, too." Eleanor's breath caught. For once, the woman who built empires had no speech ready. She simply reached for his hand. The hospital released Lily first. She left with a bounce in her step and a blanket around her shoulders like a cape. Daniel took her back to the motel, tucked her in, then returned for Eleanor. Her discharge papers lay on the counter, a list of restrictions longer than any contract she'd signed. As the nurse wheeled her out, reporters gathered at the entrance cameras flashing. Eleanor stiffened, used to wielding control in front of crowds, not surrendering it in a chair. Daniel leaned down, murmuring so only she could hear. Ignore them. Just breathe. For once, she let someone else shield her. He guided her through the noise, past questions about corporate futures and recovery into the quiet air outside. Rain had stopped, leaving the city washed and raw. Where to? He asked, unlocking his truck. Anywhere but here, she whispered. They drove in silence until skyscrapers gave way to quieter streets. Lily dozed in the back, her head bobbing against the window. Eleanor leaned against the seat, hair loose, eyes closed. She looked nothing like the untouchable woman from magazines. She looked real. At a red light, she spoke without opening her eyes. I thought dying was the end of everything. Turns out, sometimes it's the start. Daniel didn't reply right away. He just reached over his hand, brushing hers on the armrest. She didn't pull away. By the time they reached the motel, the world felt smaller, closer, like a secret they were keeping together. He helped her inside, ignoring her protests, settling her into the spare chair by the window. Lily stirred awake long enough to crawl into bed. Eleanor watched the child breathe steady and safe. She trusts you with her whole world, she said softly. Daniel met her gaze. And for some reason you do too. She gave a tired laugh. Maybe because you gave me mine back. They sat in silence after that, the motel hum filling the space. Outside, the city stretched on, endless and indifferent. But inside, in that narrow room with its flickering lamp and thin curtains, something fragile and unspoken took root. Daniel didn't call it love yet, but when Eleanor's head finally tilted onto his shoulder, he didn't move. He simply let her rest, knowing the war inside him had already chosen a side. Morning light bled slowly into the motel room, painting the walls in muted gold. Daniel woke to the sound of Lily's quiet humming. She was sketching at the little table with a pencil stub, the lavender sprig tucked carefully beside her paper. Eleanor was still asleep, her head on his shoulder, her breathing steady. For the first time in weeks, her face was at peace. Daniel eased out from under her and moved toward Lily. "What are you drawing, Bug?" he whispered. She turned the page to show him a picture of 3 figures holding hands under a crooked sun. "Us," she said matter-of-factly. "A family." Daniel's throat tightened. He brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and said nothing. Words felt too fragile. Eleanor stirred, then blinking into the light. She tried to sit straighter and winced, but Daniel steadied her. "Careful," he said. Her lips curved faintly. "Still giving orders, Sergeant." "Still ignoring them, ma'am," he replied. And for a beat they both laughed, soft and startled, like they'd stumbled onto something neither of them expected. Days blurred into a rhythm. Checkups rest, Lily's drawings multiplying across the motel walls. Eleanor's strength grew, though she moved slower, leaned on him more. And Daniel, though he told himself it was temporary, found it harder to imagine stepping back into life without her there. One evening, Patel visited. He set a folder on the table, cleared his throat. "The board has accepted your resignation, Eleanor. They'll announce it as a graceful exit for health reasons. The press will buy it." Eleanor traced the edges of the folder but didn't open it. "All those years, and I'm reduced to a footnote." "Not a footnote," Daniel said. "A free line on the page." She looked at him, then really looked, and something unguarded flickered in her eyes. "And what do I write on it?" He shrugged. "Whatever you want. Maybe something smaller, maybe something truer." Patel left, and silence filled the room again. Lily climbed onto Eleanor's lap, careful of her still tender body, and pressed another drawing into her hands. "This one's just you," she said, "because you're strong now." Eleanor's voice broke. "Thank you, sweetheart." When Lily fell asleep later, Eleanor turned to Daniel. Her tone was steadier, but her eyes shone. "I don't know what comes next. I've spent my life knowing every next move. Now I'm just lost." He reached across the narrow gap between them, covered her hand with his. "Lost isn't always bad. Sometimes it means you're finally off the wrong map." She held his gaze, and in that quiet exchange it was no longer a question whether what bound them was gratitude, circumstance, or something deeper. It simply was. Weeks later, Eleanor stood on her own porch again, a modest house Daniel had helped her settle into after she declined the board's offer of a penthouse retirement gift. She wanted something simple, something she could breathe in. Daniel and Lily unpacked boxes in the living room while she leaned on the doorframe, watching them, realizing that survival had given her more than a second chance at life. It had given her a family she hadn't dared to dream of. Lily tugged at her hand. "Come sit with us." Eleanor smiled through the lump in her throat and joined them on the floor, cardboard boxes scattered around, laughter echoing in a space that finally felt like home. Daniel caught her eye across the mess, and in that look, no promises, no speeches, was the truth neither of them could deny anymore. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from medicine or money. Sometimes it comes from a soldier's steady hand, a child's unshakable faith, and the kind of love that grows quietly in the cracks of broken things. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.